Welcome to the Mindful Toolbox, the podcast that parents and educators turn to if they believe that academic success goes hand in hand with emotional well-being. I'm your host, Sarah Lynn, a tutor, cognitive therapy specialist, and much too enthusiastic about buying houseplants. In our last episode, we unpacked emotional school-based avoidance, EBSA, and explored how behavior is often a clue, an indicator as to some underlying feelings like defiance, overwhelm, anxiety, and shame. Today, we're going to zoom in on one of those in particular, anxiety. What does it look like in children? And what's the difference between anxiety and nerves? And more importantly, what tools can we provide for our children and to ourselves to help us feel calm and safe? Let's dive in. Let me take you back a couple of years when I was a classroom teacher. We are entering a year 5. We're getting ready for a transition, so we're talking about all of those squirmy, fuzzy feelings in our belly that often arise when we're feeling nervous. One of my students, let's call him Josh, he raised his hand and he said the most profound thing I've heard a 10-year-old say. He said, "It's kind of like carrying a backpack full of jelly beans. Everyone has a backpack, but my jelly beans keep spilling out my back." And in that moment, it landed. It landed not just for me, but for the students as well. We all carry nerves. We all have feelings of anxiety or worry within ourselves. But for some of those children, those nerves don't stay in the backpack. They spill out like Josh's. And this can often be seen in behaviors like destructiveness or being a little bit like a clown in the classroom or being a little bit defiant. And honestly, when he said that, it's like my 10-year-old self showed up in that classroom, and I could see all of the different ways that my body physically responded to stress and nerves when I was their age. Specifically, when it was the first day of school. Now, for those of you who don't know, I attended 11 different schools before university. Yes, 11. And so I am quite adept at being the new kid on the block, but just because I'm used to it didn't mean that it ever felt easy. In fact, I would find myself on the floor in the bathroom crying my little heart out most first days of school, because my body felt so many emotions about re-entering into a new space, getting to know new students, putting yourself out there, and not necessarily feeling confident that my efforts would mean longevity in that school, right? Past experience has told me that if I try and I succeed, I'm going to experience heartache when I have to leave again. So there was so much confusion and anxiety and overwhelm packed tight into my little 10-year-old body. But I didn't have the words to express this. I didn't know what I was feeling, let alone being able to express it to someone. And so I did what I could do. I cried and I had a sore belly and I wanted to not go to school, and I would wake up and I would think that I was going to faint. That is my body's physiological response to the feelings and the thoughts that I was having that I couldn't put a name on. I couldn't put my finger on it. And this reaction, this physiological reaction, is what you and I are seeing when your child is being defiant and not wanting to attend school, or they're crying because they don't want to try out for dance anymore, or they completely shut down before they have to write an exam. And I'm not going to lie to you, I don't think I had this aha moment until I reached my adult years. But since I had that aha moment, since I've gone through cognitive behavior therapy, since I started really diving deep into the neuroscience behind feelings and creating programs and pathways for students and parents alike to really understand each other and themselves, that's when I started to feel like all of the puzzle pieces fit together. It started to feel like we were in flow. And that's why we're here, because I work every single day with students who have breakdown within the home. They have big illnesses or big upsets that they're dealing with. They have neurodiversities or obstacles that make attending a traditional school setting very upsetting or difficult. Or we have parents that come to us because their child wants to get into a specific school, which means that they're going to have to increase their academic rigor, but they're worried about maintaining that childlike wonder and fun while putting them through this exam season. And this is a big reason as to why I do what I do. I've felt it. I see it, and I know that there is light at the end of the tunnel. I got a phone call from one of our parents the other day, and we were chatting and catching up after doing some well-being coaching with their son. And the mom said, an absolute miracle, because now when T comes to us, we really know that what he's saying is the truth, because he's sharing his worries with us. We don't have to guess anymore. What a big shift from being able to have conversations with your child because they can acknowledge, understand, label, and communicate their feelings instead of where they started, which were big eruptions and chaotic home life and so much frustration and anger. What a big difference. And so that mom and I, we had a little dance party and we cheersed and we celebrated and we congratulated not only her and her family, but the child, because that progress towards emotional literacy was one that changed the entire family dynamic for the better. And that shift from going from bubbling up and not being able to express what your child is feeling or thinking, and shifting towards being able to communicate how they feel and what they need, that, my friends, this episode is all about. So, I've told you in the past, if you're like me, grab yourself a pen and paper. You may be on the go, so if so, don't worry. We have a checklist for you that you can download in our show notes. That way there, if you're on the go and you don't have a pen and paper with you, that's okay. We've got your back, because I understand how much we pack into these episodes, and I want you to know that we can give you a skimmable resource for you to look back on. Okay. Let's start by getting clear. What's the difference between nerves and anxiety? So one of the biggest differentiating factors is the length in which they're present. So nerves exist temporarily. They show up before something big or important happens. It's a very normal bodily response to wanting to do well or feeling like you are emotionally attached to the outcome of something. Anxiety, on the other hand, it lingers. So it will show up before, it will stay with you during, and it will still be present after the event. It interrupts sleep, appetite, mood, energy levels. One of the best things that we can do to find out if your child or yourself is experiencing nerves or anxiety is to reflect upon the question, is this feeling interfering with my day-to-day life? Because we work with students, there's so much that we do around exam performance and exam readiness. And a big section of the work that we do is understanding performance anxiety. It's a very natural process that even some of our top athletes experience. However, when those nerves linger into our daily life and they start to interrupt really important biological factors like sleep, like relationships, that's when we need to make sure we're digging in a little bit deeper to assess, is this just nerves, or is this something that we need to take into consideration a little bit more? One parent that we spoke with recently in our end of year wrap up expressed that there were moments when she was so proud of her daughter, because normally leading up to exams, she would come home crying after she had written them, expressing how she was gutted with her performance because she felt like she knew the answers. However, the overwhelm of sitting there and seeing the page and seeing the timer and knowing that everything kind of came down to this one paper was too much. And it would normally cause her to blank on so many of the questions. But this time, she came home so proud of herself because she didn't blank. And that's because when we explicitly teach how to handle nerves, they don't spiral into, and that, my friends, is the quiet progress that we're after. Okay, I'm going to read out some stats now, but I really don't think that you'll be surprised by them, though they are still shocking to hear. Here we go. 1 in 6 children in the UK have a mental health problem. That's from the NHS Digital in 2023, and it's very likely to have changed in the last year again. Post-pandemic, school-related activities is among the top triggers for anxiety. That's from Young Minds, which is a charity that supports and does so much research around youth mental health, and why we have so many students who are going through emotional-based school avoidance, which was our last week's episode. So if you haven't heard it yet, make sure you head back there. And lastly, research in Lancet discusses how anxiety disrupts cognitive function, which means memory, processing, and communication are all disrupted when a body is in a high state of anxiety, which makes sense. That's why we know of the flight, freeze, fawn reaction. It's because it's a very normal response for our body to go through when we are in a high arousal state. However, when your child is going to school or writing an exam or trying out for the football club, we don't want their body in that high state, especially for a prolonged time. That means that we've tripped into anxiety instead of staying on the more normally acceptable nerve side of the equation. Okay, so one of the favorite things that we like to do in our tutoring sessions that focus on blending well-being coaching is teach about brain science. What is actually happening in the brain when we are learning? What's happening when we're building habits? What's happening when we are feeling performance anxiety? And one of the ways that we teach it is through a program called Flip the Lid. Now, we'll have many of resources on our website, the Bettering Youth website, to help you mirror this within your own family as well. But one of the things that's important to remember, there are 3 parts of the brain that communicate with one another, and when we are in a high state of arousal, then how the information is processed breaks down. So the way that we do that through Flip the Lid is by bringing out our hand. And in the palm, in the center, where it gets really sweaty when you are anxious or nervous, is your memory-saving elephant. That is your hippocampus. That's where your memory is stored. That's where your things are processed. That is where you are going to be able to retrieve information that you have spent so hard studying and revising for. That is where you store it. Now, if we close our palm over and we have our thumb kind of tucked up in front, I know for those of you who may be just listening, imagine you've now just closed your fist like you're getting ready to do a really good right hook. And your thumb now becomes your guard dog. So your guard dog, just like an actual guard dog, is there to sense danger. That is your amygdala. It is your fire alarm system. If there is stress, the amygdala starts to do the detection. It starts to bring in that information. And if it senses stress or danger, then it will go off. It will start to bark to the rest of our system. And the rest of our system will adapt to that bark. Now, on top, where you can see your rings, on top of your fingers, that is your prefrontal cortex. We have our decision-making wise owl sitting on top of those ring fingers. Now, your wise owl is there to, be wise, to help you make good decisions, to help you remember to look across the road before you cross, or to know not to touch fire because it's hot and it will burn you. Now imagine you are sitting in an exam and you want to access that hippocampus, the part that has all of that knowledge that you have revised that's in the palm of your hand. On top of that, we have our wise owl. It's telling you not to cheat. It's telling you to take your time. It's telling you to manage your time within the exam. However, that guard dog is on high alert. And if we don't know how to make that guard dog feel calm and cool and collected within a state of nerve, then that guard dog will tip into danger and protection mode. So a stimuli like a test is no longer going to feel innocent. Instead, it's going to take on the role of being a giant woolly mammoth that's here to attack and end your life. So that guard dog starts barking. The prefrontal cortex, your wise owl, it's going to fly away. Because just like if a dog barks at a bird, it's going to fly away. Your prefrontal cortex, your thinking capacity is now nil. It's gone. You can't think very well. Now imagine your hippocampus, the elephant that's memory-based. How on earth are you supposed to think and remember something? If any of you have a dog barking, you may already understand it is no easy feat to do anything when the dog is just barking at you. It becomes an overstimulated scenario, and therefore you can no longer retrieve the information that you worked so hard to encode within your memory. You can't retrieve it anymore, no matter how hard you try, because that guard dog is barking. And so when we deal with anxiety, we need to understand that there's normal anxiety, but if our guard dog is hypersensitive, they are going to misinterpret normal everyday stimuli as high stress, high threat scenarios. And the only way that we're going to be able to move forward is if we calm that guard dog down. We can't talk to the wise owl and help them make better decisions. We can't speak to the memory-saving elephant and ask them, do you remember the last time this happened? Those two systems, they are off the grid. We need to focus on our amygdala, our guard dog, the system that turns us from fight and flight into baseline again. And this is why helping our children to step into their body, like to really feel present within their body, is going to help unlock their emotional awareness. You know, a calm body is a calm mind. So let's break down different tools and resources that you can introduce into your home, into your family's lives today to start calming and strengthening the relationship between your child and their guard dog, their amygdala. Okay, these are the Mindful Toolbox strategies. We're gonna look at 3 different layers: a body layer, a mind layer, and an environmental layer. So let's dive into the first one. Okay, the first one is a skill that I would recommend pre-teaching. So tonight at dinner, do some pre-teaching with your child and help them identify which they prefer. The first one is called the grounding technique. So it is looking at 5 senses and focusing our brain that is rushing when we're anxious into the present moment. Because when we're anxious, we usually have rushing thoughts of the future, the what ifs. So this grounding technique helps us to slow those thoughts down and zoom into the present moment. So first we start with the 5 things that we can see. So in the room, I can see my beautiful camera, I can see my microphone, the flowers, my iPad that has all of my lovely resources for us, and a plant, and I'll add one more, my coffee. The second thing that we focus on are 4 things that we can touch. So this is about getting into the present moment by connecting the environment to your body. So I can touch the pillow and feel the fuzziness of it. I can feel the seat underneath me, and it's like a little bit soft because it's leather. I have a really cozy rug underneath my feet, so that's 3. And I have it feels kind of cold. My iPad kind of feels cold in my hand. So that would be 4. 4 things that I can touch. Then we move on to 3 things that you can hear. I can hear the buzz of my laptop because she's working hard. I can hear birds outside because we are June and it's a really bird bustly kind of environment. And I can hear my neighbors bringing in their bins because it was garbage day today. So 3 things that you can hear. Then we head over to number 2, and I bet you already guessed this one. We are looking at 2 things that we can smell. Now, because it's spring, summer, I can still smell the pollen, so I would say that's one of them. And the other thing that I can smell is the candle burning behind my wonderful camera, which is a very nice earthy sandalwood kind of smell. And then that leads us to number 1, our final sense that we are going to tap into, and that is taste. What is one thing you can taste? And this is often a more complex one because you may not be eating anything, you might not have anything in your mouth. So what is it that you can taste? You can look at something abstract. Maybe you can taste the bile of feeling like you're about to get sick. You can taste your fear, or your mouth can feel incredibly dry. For me, I taste my coffee. And so that would be something that I would be able to focus on. Now, the reason why we do this is because it helps our body and our mind detach and become more grounded and present in the moment. But I'm going to share something with you that I think is often overlooked because these are tools that you can easily find. You just went on Pinterest and you were looking for ways to calm anxiety. They may say this 5 senses grounded practice. And I agree, it's a phenomenal one, which is why it's the top one in my suggestions. However, there's 2 important caveats to keep in mind. 1, it's so important to do pre-teaching for this. It's really difficult to walk someone through this when their guard dog is already off. You can't reel that guard dog back in and then have them do tricks, right? You need them present with you, paying attention, and then they can start going through the different commands that you're asking them to do. The second caveat to be aware of is that some of these may actually cause overwhelm. So for me, I know that looking at all of the things that I can see, the first activity, the 5 visual stimuli, I find that incredibly overwhelming. And I also feel the auditory stimuli likewise overwhelming. And so what I focus on is what I can touch and what I can smell. Those 2 things really help ground me within the present moment because I can feel the seat under me holding up my weight, strong and supported. I can feel my feet firmly planted on the ground. I can feel the breath. And that is enough to help me feel present in the moment without tipping me into overwhelm. And so help your child to identify what it is that they prefer as their sense focus, and then help them practice it even when they're not anxious, so it becomes a really habitual practice for them when they need it. Okay, number 2 in the body layer is called a butterfly hug. Now, this one is one of my favorites, and you can actually model this with your child before they do it independently. It's called a butterfly hug. We wrap our arms around ourselves as if we're giving ourselves a big giant bear hug. And we're going to tap right hand, left shoulder, left hand, right shoulder. So you're just alternating taps from side to side. And sometimes I like to close my eyes. Sometimes I like to sway while I do it. These gentle alternating taps. What it's doing is it's making my brain now focus on something other than my thoughts. Instead of thinking about what I have to do and how stressful it'll be and what if, I now have to think about keeping a rhythm with my alternating hand taps. I'm also swaying side to side, which just is a very natural, normal release of tension that helps to regulate that vagus nerve, the nerve that will help to bring upon our very stress-free and relaxed state. Now, like I said, this is a really wonderful one that you can actually model for your child. So when you go and give them a hug, give them that butterfly hug from side to side. Ask them if it helped. Ask them if it helped them to concentrate on something. When we're feeling incredibly stressed and anxious and our mind is reeling, one of the best things we can do is bring it back to the present moment. And we do that through bodily sensation. That's one of the quickest ways that we can do it. So go ahead, give that butterfly hug a go today, and let's see what your child says. Okay, the last thing that we're going to talk about in the body layer is a balloon breath. Now, I've only mentioned this one because it's one of the easiest as an introduction, but breath work is incredibly important. It's something that, is found in Eastern European meditation and yoga practices. It's something that our top athletes will focus on prior and during their performances. Breath is the only way that we can be in the present moment, because you cannot breathe into the future and we cannot breathe into the past. So connecting to our breath is an incredibly empowering tool to find ourselves in the moment and no longer wrapped up in the anxiety. So the balloon breath, it's really easy. We have our child sit up nice and tall. We plant their feet firmly on the ground and we ask them to place their hand on their belly. Now we're going to ask them to take a really nice big relaxed, not stressed, relaxed, deep breath in, imagining that they're pulling in air to expand the balloon that is their belly. And then we're going to ask them to hold it for a couple of seconds and then exhale really, really powerfully through their mouth as if they're blowing into that. You know that sound when you're blowing into the balloon and sometimes you don't quite get the air into the balloon, it goes because you've been blowing so aggressively. That's the sound that we want when they exhale. Okay, so it's a little bit like the flipped version of what actually happens when you blow into a balloon and it expands and then you stop blowing into the balloon and it contracts. It is the opposite because we need to actually inhale to blow the balloon up in our belly and exhale to let it contract. But hopefully it will be a really good visual. And you can also help them practice by exploring with a balloon as well. So adding that link between the visual and the sensory feeling. But here we go. We're going to sit up nice and tall, hands on our belly. I like to close my eyes when I do breathing exercises, so if you're watching, that is what I'm doing. So I'm going to close my eyes, sitting up nice and tall. I'm going to breathe in through my nose, bring that air straight down to my belly. And just like that, have actively slow down your heart rate, your nervous system that is in a heightened state. You've just knocked it back into rest and relaxation simply by taking control of your breath. It's why when children are crying and they can't stop crying, we offer them water. Why? A, it distracts them, and B, they have to regulate their breathing in order to drink the water. And if, like me, you are now totally hooked on breath work, head over to our Bettering Youth Tutors Instagram, because every week I share well-being tips, and actually breath work is a very important topic that we cover, and I share a variety of different ways that you can incorporate breath work into your daily life. Okay, heading into the second layer, this is the mind layer. Now I'm going to teach you one of the very important tactics that we actually use with our students preparing for exams or really big events, and that is called the F/4. So the F/4 process is all about how and when we process anxiety and nerves. So the first F stands for facts. Now, the reason why we start with facts is because a lot of times we assume that what our brain says, so the thoughts that we have, we just assume that they're true. But let's make sure we're all on the same page here. What you think is not always factual. So let's grab a piece of paper and write down all of the thoughts that are coming up in your mind. They may even be presented in fear format. So write down all of the fears that you have. I am worried and fearful that I'm going to fail my exam. I'm fearful that if by failing my exam, I'm letting my family down. I'm fearful that if I let my family down, they're not going to believe in me anymore and put me forward to do other things that I want to do. I'm fearful that a failed exam means that I won't get into the school that I want or into the form class that I'm after, and this is going to derail my entire future. This is an actual script that so many of our students give themselves. So we have those fears written down. What we're going to do is beside it, in a second column, we're going to put a little arrow. Actually, you know what? We're going to do something even more empowering. What we're going to do is we're going to grab a red pen or your child's favorite color pen, and you're going to scratch out that fear. And beside it or underneath it, you're going to have them rewrite a fact. I am afraid that I'm going to fail the test. Okay, what's a fact? I have revised incredibly diligently, and I feel confident, maybe not to that point yet, and I know that I will give this my best shot. Are you saying that you're going to pass with flying colors and you have no reason to be afraid that you're going to fail? No. Writing the fact is not there to disregard what the fear is or to even just layer it with positive thinking. Instead, what we're doing is we're grounding into the truth. You had a fear that you're going to fail, but the fact is you've been revising, and so you're going to give it the best go that you can. Number 2, I have a fear that I'm going to let my family down if I fail the exam. Okay, the fact. Well, maybe I need to talk to my family to find out how they would feel if I would fail the exam. Or perhaps the family's listening, knowing that your child might have this inner dialogue, you can curb it for them. You can curb the effort, and you can remind them consistently that failure is just part of the journey. And if they don't do as well as you had hoped, and maybe they don't pass the entrance exam or the exam to get their next grade to move forward with their school journey, that it's not going to pull away the love and care that you have for them, that you will be there to support them through the process. 3, if I fail the exam, I won't get into the school that I want, which means that XYZ. Okay, the fact. Failing the exam does not have to be an end-all be-all. There are alternatives for getting into the school that I want, the class form that I want, and perhaps it's also about adjusting my belief system. Maybe I'm not meant to be at that school. And maybe if I did get into that school, I would really struggle because it doesn't match who I am as a person. So there's a little bit of an awareness that there are things that we can take control of and that we have taken control of, and those are the facts. But there's also a little bit of a mindset shift that needs to happen around what the outcome may mean in the long term. The first F out of our 4F program is looking at the facts. So we're looking at writing down those fears and then grounding them in fact. The second F in this 4F program is focus. This is one of my absolute favorite ways to encourage our students not to let that guard dog take control of a scenario. Focus means later, not now. It doesn't mean that we're denying ourselves the ability to worry or feel fear or to even have anxious thoughts roaming our minds. But what we're doing instead is we're saying, we're focusing right now. Thank you, brain, for trying to protect me, but I'm going to focus and we'll deal with this later. It's not about shutting those things down. It's about making sure that your prefrontal cortex, the wise owl, they stay in control. They're the ones who are saying, thank you, not right now. We'll come back to this. And then we actually have to give time to come back to it. And that brings us to our third F out of 4F program, and that is feel. So you've done the exam, you've done the performance, you've done the tryout. Now you feel it. You set yourself a timer and you feel and you write and you cry and you just really allow yourself to go through all of those emotions that you said later, not now to. You worry about the exam question that you missed. You talk about how you don't think you did the right steps in that ballet recital. You explore how maybe you could have showed up as a better teammate when you were doing your tryout. You really let yourself process and go through the feelings that showed up for you in that event. But don't forget, set a timer. And then when that is done, you guessed it, that leads us to our fourth F of the F program, and that is flow. Flow, we need to reconnect to our body, to the present moment, and shift the energy around. You've just been really deep into your feels. We need to get moving. So find some flow, whether it means that you stand up and you do some bends to touch your toes, you expand your arms high above your head with a really big exhale, you do some jumping jacks, or you more intentionally do active movement. You go for a walk, you go for a run, maybe you do a workout. Do something that's going to shift the energy and get you reconnected and grounded in the present moment with your body. That wraps up the 4F program, which is the first of our mind layer. So we focus on the facts. We focus. So there's facts, focus, feel, flow. And then remember, if any of these are of interest to you and you're worried that you're going to forget them, don't worry. We have it all written out for you in our show notes in a printable, so you can come back to this at a later time. Okay, heading into our second activity in the mind layer, and that is the worry box. Now, I got the idea of the worry box when I was in Teachers College. It was such a simple way for us to create a space where children could feel empowered to share what they were thinking and feeling and what they were worried about without the added layer of speaking directly to someone or feeling the pressure of being able to communicate it well while someone was listening and observing. And so the worry box is a physical box that we leave within the family home, and whoever they want, even mom and dad, you can add things to this worry box, and you can decide if you want it to be anonymous or if you want it to be named. And my suggestion is to make a deal that at every Friday night dinner, when you're sitting down and you're doing your family meeting, which if you don't know about family meetings, definitely go check out our website for more details on a family meeting. It was one of the first episodes of the Mindful Toolbox back in 2021 and is still one of our most downloaded first episodes. So definitely check it out. But you get your worry box out, let's say once a week, and someone will read through them. Let's allow the table, the entire family, to engage with what the worry is. So let's say our child who's getting ready for this exam had the fear of letting their family down if they failed the exam. Now, we want them to ground those fears into facts, but if they don't know how the family is going to respond, it's still going to be a worry for them. This is a perfect place for them to find out what the vibe is amongst the family, right? They'll write down, I'm worried that you will be upset with me if I fail my exam. They put it in the box on Friday. You're sitting down. There's 5, 6 of you at the table, and mom reads, I'm worried that you will be upset with me if I fail the exam. Okay. First moment, acknowledge and validate the worry. Okay, I'm so grateful that you wrote this down. Thank you so much for sharing this. This feels like a really big burden for you to be holding on to. I'm really sad that you feel like that our love could be transactional, but I can assure you that our love is not going to be dictated by whether or not you pass or fail an exam. I want you to know full-heartedly that we see the effort that you're putting into. We understand how difficult it is to be put into an exam scenario, and we get that it's tricky and overwhelming and there's so much pressure for it. But let me assure you, we love you no matter the outcome. And if you were to fail, we would figure it out together. And now that child can look at that fear that they've written down that says that their family will hate them if they fail. They can now ground it in fact. So having a physical worry box is a phenomenal way to get things out in the open and have multiple voices to discuss it. For instance, one of our parents came to us and she said, "Is it okay if I add things to the worry box?" And at the time, I hadn't even considered a parent adding to the worry box. So I said, "Well, what would you add? What do you want to add to the worry box?" And she said, "I'm really worried that my children are disappointed when I can't show up for school pickup. I'm really worried that they're so disappointed with me that they have to go with a childminder or a nanny first." And I said, "That's a good one. That sounds like it's really weighing on you. Like you have a lot of conflict, internal conflict about this. Definitely put it in the worry box." And so she came back to me a couple of weeks later and she said it was one of the most profound family meetings that they had had, because not only did she get to share something that she was worried about, but her children were able to step into the validator position, the listener position. They were able to empower their mom by expressing, these are the ways that we feel, but this is also how we feel. Or maybe there's a compromise that we can come to. By having that very vulnerable conversation with her family, that mom modeled effective communication of worry and vulnerability. And it showed within that family dynamic how they were able to start validating each other. It was no longer the parents always needing to share and show up for their child, but their children were starting to do it more to each other. And then there was more of a reciprocal response within that family dynamic. And so this worry box might come across or might seem like a very offhanded thing to do. I know at the beginning for me it did, but the more you use it, the more the impact will truly shine through that family unit. Okay, that leads us to number 3 of the mind layer, and this is naming it to tame it. Now, again, this might feel a little superfluous. This might feel a little too easy for it to work, but I promise just the act of naming what you feel allows you to take away its power. So for instance, I've shared a little bit about my own experience with anxiety. I had an entire year of debilitating anxiety that wouldn't even allow me to leave the couch, let alone the house. And this was pre-pandemic. And I couldn't quite figure out why. What was the main cause? Why did I go from being this very adventurous, outgoing, active person to someone literally stuck on their couch, fearing death every single day? And it was through cognitive behavior therapy and speaking to my family that I started to address what I was feeling. I started to say, this is anxiety. I am feeling really anxious right now. But the choice of words, I am feeling anxious right now, then empowered me to choose differently. I'm feeling really anxious right now, but you know what? I'm going to go outside and reclaim some joy of feeling the sun on my face. And it sounds like I'm saying, it really does. It sounds so nonsensical. Like, how could saying something out loud change how we feel. But I promise it does. It really does, because when we start to name something, it's almost like we dissociate from it. I feel anxious. I'm not anxious. I feel anxious. I'm not angry. I feel angry. I'm not nervous. I feel nervous. When I feel something, I'm reminded that feelings pass. They filter. They have a start, a middle, and an end. And the way that I feel will come to an end. And it doesn't feel like it's soon. It honestly feels like when you're in it, that darkness will stay forever. And your child, they feel it too, which is why they have such a big response to anxiety and frustration. It's because they don't know and they don't understand that what they're feeling will pass. But by helping them to name it out loud and dissociate by saying, you feel that way, and then helping them to choose a different feeling that they want to maybe lean into, that is going to help them shift their energy between the feelings. And by doing so, we're not numbing ourselves to anxiety or getting rid of the anger by just choosing to be happy. Instead, we're acknowledging. Okay, and the last activity to suggest under the mind layer is to play the detective. I want you to imagine, and to encourage your child to imagine, the most disturbingly rude and aggressive and judgmental judge that they can think of in their mind. What kind of hair do they have? And then ask themselves to put their thought, their fear, their worry to this judge, this really strict critic, and ask them to judge it. Does this belong in your brain? Does it belong as something taking up your headspace? Be your own judge. Encourage your child to be their own judge when it comes to determining what can stay in their mind and take up valuable space and what needs to go. Okay, heading into our third layer, the environmental layer. One of the very first things that you can start implementing are safe start rituals. So morning check-ins, how they can ground themselves, what kind of routine do you want to build? Are there any mind or body activities that we've already gone through today that they want to build into a morning routine? Is there any kind of affirmation that they want to go through with themselves? Is there a new identity that you're trying to create, like we talked about in our second episode about emotional-based school avoidance? When we start to unravel and then provide ourselves a script to go through, an identity to complete, that's where we can start seeing some progress. So is there something that they can add to their morning check-in? Is there anything that you can do to help them feel a little bit more seen and validated throughout the school year? I know sometimes we would get little notes in our lunchbox, and while some of the other students would come and comment or giggle at it, it was such an endearing and important part of those really difficult first days in the new school for me. If you're an educator, there's so many different ways that we can encourage connection by offering choice. And that could be through a special handshake or some kind of greeting. When we stand at the door and we welcome our students in, we can ask them, we can determine if we're looking for a high five, if we're looking for a smile, if we're looking for a specific handshake or move that we give to each other. And each child gets to choose this, which means that they are empowered and given something that makes them feel seen. And the last thing that we can look at for tackling anxiety with an environmental layer is a co-regulation space. So that may be a physical space in your home or a time frame. So whether it's you sitting down for a couple of minutes before bed to just decompress and discuss what happened throughout the day, to sit side by side and journal together or acknowledge what you're grateful for, or it's those small touches when you pick them up from school or drop them off, those special handshakes even within the family dynamic, or it's the special, the little cuddles that you give them when you pick them up after they've done something that was really difficult for them. It can also be within your home. So maybe there's a special pillow that is just really tactile and lovely to play with. Or there's a blanket that you put over them at night that just makes them feel like they're wrapped up in a cocoon, like a weighted blanket. There's so many different ways that we can change or add to our environment to help create a very sensual feeling, like a tactile response for the body to feel nice and calm. Okay, so that wraps up our 3-layered approach to tackling anxiety. We had the mind, the body, and the environmental. Now I want to share with you something that I'm not sharing because I'm like tooting my own horn or bragging, but it's so important, I think, for us when we're in the depths, when we're in the learning pit and things feel really overwhelming. It's really important to see that there are other people who are climbing out of the learning pit or on the other side of that journey. So I want to share this one with you. This one is about a student named R. Now, I worked with them for well over a year. When we first began working together, their OCD tendencies and their anxiety were through the roof. Now, when I tell you that this was a really brilliant, bright child who wanted to learn, but was in such a state of heightened arousal that their brain wasn't able to absorb anything that they were being taught, I make no exaggeration. This child was in freeze and fawn mode. They were very close to shutdown. So any kind of stimuli that was coming in was not actually being processed or encoded. There was no learning happening because their brain just didn't have capacity. So when we started working together, what we unpicked was that there were huge narratives around the importance of getting things right and making sure that there was no failure attached to the learning process. We also identified that when we were in maths specifically, the threshold for new learning that pushed them outside of that comfort zone, it was even smaller, which meant that as soon as there was something that looked a little bit intimidating, shutdown mode, they were not even going to try. So what we had to do was unpick that narrative and rebuild some confidence and resilience and essentially build an awareness on the learning journey. So it didn't feel like we were just saying, well, for you specifically, sometimes you're not going to get it right. We had to show him that everyone goes through a learning curve and everyone has stop, starts, and backward moments. And so when we were able to do that by looking at footballers and artists that he appreciated and really felt drawn to, or even his parents, when we were able to go through different narratives of how people learn, he started to build a little bit of awareness of that learning cycle and apply it to his own process, which was phenomenal. Then we helped him tap into his emotions. So we had him map out where he felt specific things. We started small. So we drew out his body and asked him to identify in what part of his body does he feel happiness or joy. And so we had, that big, beautiful smile. We had eyes wide and bright. We had maybe a little bit of a flutter in the heart because you were excited. You might have had a little bit of movement within your hands because there was energy buzzing around. When we started to map out where physiologically the body experiences different emotions, we were then able to start picking out which emotions he felt and where in his body. Then we were going through our third phase, which was unpicking how to regulate those emotions. So now that we know that we feel excitement when we're getting ready for our football game, or we're feeling anxiety when we enter math class, now we can start regulating those. And we went through many of the activities already shared with you above. But essentially, with these 3 steps, we built a toolbox that R can pull from in a variety of different scenarios that kind of evoke that anxiety and those OCD tendencies. He felt empowered because he understood things differently now. He felt in control because he had tools to help himself explain when he needed support and to self-regulate. And he felt better moving through scenarios that would often be totally off limits, because now he felt the calm confidence of what it means to go through the learning curve. I actually want to share with you what his mom wrote to us in our feedback calls. This course was a great investment for R and for us as an entire family. His anxiety and OCD tendencies are dwindling, and we now have a better language and tool set in approaching when he feels like he needs support. We have our shiny, brilliant boy back, and he feels freer to be himself. And his dad goes on to add that he is now able to communicate better with the family, which means that they feel more empowered to step in when he looks like he needs a little bit of support, but also to feel confident in encouraging him to navigate the scenario that may have felt a little bit wobbly before. And that's essentially why we are here. This is why I do the work that I do. It's not to fix something. Nothing is broken. It's about to provide education on the brain and how it works, on the system and how we react and respond to anxiety, and how we can build a toolbox to empower children and parents to work together to thrive within and beyond the classroom. So if you're a UK-based family, you will know that we are in summer, but we're coming close to school starting again, which means another transition is on the horizon. So I want to provide you with an actionable takeaway that you can either have in the back of your mind or start implementing today. It's called the transition timeline. And essentially, it's broken down into questions that you and your family can discuss before, during, and after a really big transition. So the question that you can ask before is, what can go wrong? And I know you're thinking, with Sarah Lynn, these children have a predisposition to anxiety. They are already going to be scanning the world for what can go wrong. I get it. We don't want to be adding more fuel to the fire, but because that is their natural setting, by asking that question first, you're going to get out all of their answers, and then you can go through the process of helping them put those fears into facts. But not only that, when we go through that initial what can go wrong, it then allows conversation for what can go right. And that is probably the more important question. Then you're going to go through the during part. So while things are happening, you can ask them, what are you doing to help yourself manage the fluctuations of emotions? What are you doing to help yourself stay grounded? What can I do to help you? Where do you think you might need a little bit of support? And then don't forget to unpack after. What actually happened? You had these really big fears that something terrible was going to happen. And we talked about how you would handle it. But did those terrible things happen? Can we maybe notice by looking at events before they happen a couple of times together? Can we notice that maybe your brain automatically looks for the worst case scenario, but it 9 times out of 10 never turns out that way? Is there anything that we can maybe do to shift your normal instinctual thinking? By helping your child be self-reflective and accepting where they are already is going to empower them to make those micro adjustments that will see huge leaps and bounds in confidence and resilience in the future. And of course, you can also print out that 4F worksheet that lists out what you can do to stay grounded before, during, and after something that's really quite tricky or stimulating for your child. But remember, you never have to do everything that I've listed out. It's so beautiful to have this want and this energy to try all of the things and put into practice all of the activities, but it's really important to pace ourselves and be reflective as to what will work best with you and your specific child. So, like I said, if you haven't written it down, don't worry, head over to our show notes. We have those principles available for you to use at your leisure. And I would really love for you guys to come back to me and tell me what you tried, what worked, what's not working. If you have questions, please send them in. Your thoughts and your experiences are what we build this show on. And if there's anything that we can specifically support you through, we would love to be able to do that. So I check and read every single one of my messages and respond to them personally. So please feel free to pop some questions and concerns and wins. Let's celebrate your wins in that chat box as well. And we can build a community around parents who are empoweringly, is that the right word? Who are proactively taking action to support their child at a really rocky climate. Okay, and as always, if this episode has resonated with you, share it with your top 3 friends. This might be the episode that helps that child feel unstuck, helps them to get seen and the support that they need. Receiving this episode from one of your friends is such a big indication that you have a strong tribe that sees you and wants you to feel supported. So continue to pass this on and let's build a connection, a community of parents that feel validated for their efforts in this harrowing experience of parenthood, because let's face it, it is. And when we have different layers added on top with anxiety and mental health and neurodivergence, it just creates this extra lens that we need to see the world through. And so if we can create a community around it, the burden, not even the burden, but the view feels a lot less tricky. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things. You know, this podcast is about building that village. It's about being authentic and honest and learning from one another and having compassion for each other's experiences. It's not going to be perfect, as you saw today. Unfortunately, the video clipped out halfway through and we just had to keep going with what we got. So thank you for sticking with us this week. Hopefully the audio got you through the rest of the journey, and I cannot wait to see you in episode 4 of the Mindful Toolbox. We're going to be diving in deep into resilience and recovery. So how to support our children when things don't go as planned. Until then, take a deep breath. You are doing amazing. And I'm so excited to have, and I'm so honored to be part of your journey. Until next time, don't forget, you bring the tea and I'll bring the tools.